blackout of the internet almost certainly is a deliberate act which is designed to create a media darkness, a reporting darkness over the coming days, during which there will be brutal repression. We know that tens have already been killed, likely numbers probably higher, thousands, over 2,000 already arrested as a conservative estimate. I think we sadly are about to see something much more bloody coming in the next few days. Whether that will deter the protests or not is a big question. Whether it leads to the end of the regime, I think, is probably premature to say that that is imminent. Although when the regime does fall, it's likely to be fairly swift.
We could be looking at a change of leadership in Iran.
I do think something feels different about this moment, and it's not the size of the protests, it's not the geographic scope of the protests. They're actually smaller, I think, than what we saw back in 2022. But I think what's different now is these protests are coupled with a regime that just looks bankrupt, that looks absolutely out of ideas and unable to tackle any of the crises inside of Iran that are fueling these protests.
Well, let's hear now from Hala Blake, who is co-founder of United for Masa, a British-Iranian activist group born out of the Woman Life Freedom protests a few years ago, and also Nicholas Hopton, former British ambassador to Iran. Welcome to you both.
Good evening.
Well, Hala, let me start with you, because we've been talking about this internet blackout, so it's very hard to know what's going on the ground. What have you managed to ascertain from your contacts with people demonstrating?
So it was just under an hour since the protests really started on the grounds last night, before the internet got completely shut down. And what we gathered during that time was that within minutes of people coming out, shooting has already started on north side of Tehran. So that's the capital city. And what we saw and heard from accounts on the streets from those who protested during the Women Life Freedom movement, they actually said this is way much larger. And that nature of it is actually does couple with what we see is the strikes from the bazaars actually go hand in hand with the protests. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get accurate information out of Iran in the past 24 hours during that blackout. It's not just the internet, it's also all lines of communication have been stopped, which means anyone who went out protesting last night, we don't know if they've managed to get home or they're in a hospital somewhere or in a morgue. So we just don't have any clarity. And this is quite systematic to stop the information going out for independent media specifically, and also controls the information. And this is a tactic used previously whilst they were massacring over 5,000 people in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, that's a terrible fear, isn't it? Under cover of this blackout, as you say, there are terrible, it's a terrible clampdown going on. Do you get a sense then that the protesters have the upper hand, or do you fear that a really draconian crackdown is happening now, is underway, with terrible consequences?
We did see horrible crackdowns in various locations and shooting directly at protesters. This was widely recorded on cameras and shared online, and that we saw more of that actually in the first few days in comparison to the whole of 2022 protests. The fear is obviously more of these crackdowns, executions, any sort of anything to die down any kind of movement from the people. So the fear from the diaspora is that this outage will result into thousands of innocent, unarmed protesters being killed and massacred.
So do you have any hope then? It sounds like you know, people are talking about the possible end of the regime. It sounds from what you're saying that you're more fearful that this is a regime now trying to take back control.
That obviously that risk may always remain. I think what we see different this time is that people are chanting for the future. They're sort of gone past this regime. They see hope, they see a form. There's a plan of transition under Crown Prince's Reza Pahlavi's instructions. So there is leadership that we were missing in the previous one. So there is a great amount of hope. And I think people felt a little bit more braver with Trump's messages of just, tweets of saying that he was supporting the Iranians and that the Ayatollah should not shoot at the protesters. That just brought people more brave that this time round there is strong leadership behind them, whereas we did not see that previously in previous protests in 2009, 2019 and 2022.
Nick, let me bring in Nicholas Hopton here, former British ambassador to Iran. Good evening, Nicholas.
Good evening.
Let me just ask you, just to pick up on what we've heard from Hala there, do you think that this is the beginning of the end for the regime, or do you think this blackout signifies a brutal crackdown of the kind we've seen in the past?
Well, on the second point, I think I totally agree with Hala that the media, the blackout of the internet, almost certainly is a deliberate act which is designed to create a media darkness, a reporting darkness over the coming days, during which there will be brutal repression. We know that tens have already been killed, likely numbers probably higher, thousands, over 2,000 already arrested as a conservative estimate. I think we sadly are about to see something much more bloody coming in the next few days. Whether that will deter the protests or not is a big question. Whether it leads to the end of the regime, I think, is probably premature to say that that is imminent. Although when the regime does fall, it's likely to be fairly swift. But I think the most important thing at the moment is that the West, the media, politicians, keep a strong focus on what is happening in Iran. Keep talking about it. Don't get distracted by whatever President Trump decides to do next. And that will help the protesters and give them courage from what protesters in the past have said. And it will also probably deter the authorities from the worst excesses of their crackdown.
So are you not hopeful that Donald Trump will come to their aid, as he's promised to do? Do you see his concentration not helping the protesters in Iran right now?
Well, I think the world's bandwidth, and not just leaders, is limited. And we saw last weekend how, after quite a lot of focus on the protests, the early days of the protests in Iran, with what happened in Venezuela, suddenly for 2 or 3 days, there was no focus at all on what was going on in Iran, even though the protests were continuing and escalating. That is the reality of how global news cycles work. But I think it's very important that the focus does remain, because that does give encouragement, support to those protesting and looking for a more liberal and democratic and human rights respecting Iran. Now, whether President Trump might intervene or how he might intervene, it seems doubtful that he can protect protesters as he's threatened the regime with doing if they continue to shoot them. He can't. It's very hard to see how he can do that without actually putting boots on the ground, which doesn't seem likely at all.
Well, does it not? Because there has been a suggestion that perhaps Trump might sort of extract the Ayatollah in the same way that he's done for Maduro in some way. Do you think it's more likely that the Ayatollah would go into exile of his own accord?
I think those are both scenarios, but they probably the less likely scenarios at the moment. The Supreme Leader, Khamenei, is not Nicolas Maduro. He has disappeared largely from public sight since the beginning of the 12-day war last June with Israel. And I imagine the American may well have an idea where he is, and others will as well. But actually extracting him from a country, Iran, which is probably much more complex and has a bigger security apparatus, and as a population, as a regime, is much more difficult to tackle in that way than Venezuela, I would argue. I'm not sure that would be the obvious option for the US president at this point. More likely, Kathy, would be some sort of targeted bombing of regime IRGC installations and sites, designed to send a very strong message, discouraging crackdown on the protesters. Whether it would be listened to is not clear.
I'll go back to Hala in just a second, just for another thought on the protests and who's participating. But I just want to ask you one more thing, please, Nicholas, which is the idea that perhaps the people who are going to end up having the upper hand, the militia, the Revolutionary Guard, the army, those three groups are really crucial in what happens next. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, sometimes people do suggest that the most likely successor to the Islamic Republic would actually be a military-led dictatorship, whether that's the IRGC directly taking over or other military aspects within the country. I think it's quite difficult to separate out the IRGC from the theocracy, from the clerics who are involved in the politics. And of course, not all Iranian clerics agree with the involvement of ayatollahs and other religious leaders in domestic politics. There is a division within the theocracy, but obviously the supreme leader is the leader of a faction who run the country to a large extent with the military and other security forces, and a huge number of business interests as well. So I think actually separating them out is far more complicated as a prospect than sometimes commentators suggest.
And just one other thought I'll put to you, sorry, it just came to mind. The Shah, Reza Pahlavi, who we heard Hala talking about just a bit earlier, is he a likely or a valid replacement for the Ayatollah? Is that a likely scenario in your view or not?
Well, one of the things that makes these protests different is that if we'd been doing an interview like this about previous protests, as Hala described, there have been many rounds of protests before. But certainly when I was ambassador there a decade ago, there were protests at the end of 2017, and they were violent, and they were repressed in a very violent, bloody way. But we wouldn't have been talking about Reza Pahlavi in this way. What's different this time round is that there is slightly more, I wouldn't want to exaggerate it, slightly more unity among the opposition voices, among the protesters in what they're calling for. And the son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi, has put forward a much clearer vision of a process which he would be involved in, not to bring back the Shah or the monarchy as the long-term outcome, but to lead to a referendum on the future of the country and some sort of democratic transition.
Right.
Others are gathering around that vision in a way that wasn't the case previously. Now, I wouldn't want to overstate this, but that is I think, a new development, and greater unity within the opposition will certainly be needed if the regime is to fall.
And Nicholas Hopton, thank you very much for joining us, former British ambassador to Iran there. Let me just return for a final thought to Hala Blake, co-founder of United for Masa. So that was the group, Hala, wasn't it, that was born out of the Woman Life Freedom protests. Are women very much at the centre of these new protests?
They're not at the centre of it, but they're certainly a part of it. And we're seeing all segments of the society coming out to protest. And I've seen videos of an 11-year-old calling for people to come out to protest. I've also seen videos of a woman in a hijab on the side of the street chanting "Death to the dictator." So this is really the entire segment of the society. So it's not just women leading here, but the actual nature of this protest started in the bazaars, which is the merchants who are majority men, but by the day two, women joined these protests. So it's the entire society together coming to make a change with a very clear vision, with a very clear leadership. And I think that's what's really different to 2022, which we did not have.
Hala Blake, thank you very much for joining us. And earlier, Nicholas Hopton, the former British ambassador to Iran.